What's the backdrop there, Kathy, that you're in front of?
Oh, that's on Vancouver Island. I used to live in Parksville when
Oh,
I was a child, and that's Parksville Beach. My mom still lives there.
oh, nice.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
My wife is from BC, so I'm pretty sure I visited that beach at one point.
I'm gonna
Oh, yes, it's famous. You probably have.
I'm gonna open the waiting room. And over to you, Anna. Just give it 1 second for people to come in, and I'll replace.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Here we are. Welcome in. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue on behalf of all of us here behind the scenes and at ForSpace. I'll just give you a few seconds to settle in. And as you do so, it's my pleasure to pass the floor over to Kathy Richardson, who's here with us. Good morning, Kathy.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're feeling good today. And where I am, it's a beautiful snowy white day on the traditional Abenaki territory in southern Quebec. And so I'd just like to welcome you all and open this meeting by acknowledging the territory. And so Concordia University in Sdg, Montreal, is located upon the traditional lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka people, the Haudenosaunee or Mohawk people. And they have been on this land since the beginning of human habitation on this section of Turtle Island, Mother Earth. And we also acknowledge the other First Nations in Quebec and the Métis, and the historical interaction between peoples on this land. We look to the future with a spirit of harmony and social justice. And when I'm talking about acknowledging the land, we do it for political purposes. We come from different nations, and it's a part of a nation to nation protocol to indicate that you're showing up in peace and with a spirit of good relations. I'm not holding a gun. That's why I shake your hand. And so it's a way of greeting one another. On a more spiritual level, it's also a way of acknowledging Earth or Mother Earth and our place on this particular spot where we're sitting or standing. So for me, acknowledging our relationship with the earth and our more than human kin is important for reminding ourselves of our place in the system and in this ecosystem. Relationality is really important. And when we think about how we got here, our ancestors, and what they may have been fleeing in order to come here, I think it brings a sense of humility, but also it can rouse certain commitments. I'm living on this land. My needs are met. I'm sustained with the food and the waters of this land. And I have a commitment back to continue to be a good guest, to continue to care for the natural world, the plants, the animals, everything that sustains our life as humans. For me, it also rouses a sense of gratitude that I'm not Haudenosaunee, but I live here. I've been welcomed on these lands. I probably will never be asked to leave, but I have to keep in mind that tension of being a visitor on someone else's land, where in their permission was actually never sought or granted. So I'm grateful for my life here, and my commitment then is to be a good guest and to try to further the calls to action in Canada and respect for Indigenous rights and lands and peoples. So I hope that frame some of our conversation today. As I mentioned, many of our ancestors, I am Métis. On my mom's side, I have Cree and Gwich'in ancestry, and my dad's people came to Canada from England, from Northern England, as coal miner people. And so they also were fleeing poverty, just getting over the Second World War, as were many of our ancestors who came to these lands seeking refuge and a better life. So today, as we talk about social issues, including poverty, we want to hold that spirit of lending a hand and helping each other up out of poverty or out of unjust social conditions. And I think in the Indigenous context, that's also going to involve something called decolonization, which is a very big word and which we're not particularly addressing today, but it could form some background to our conversations. So I wish you all well, and I hope you have good discussions. Thank you, all my relations.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for situating us and opening up the session so beautifully. So here we are in Force Space, where daily live events happen, such as this one. What we aim to do is create engagement around the various projects, initiatives, and dialogues in development across the university. So to that end, it's been our pleasure for Doug and I. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning.
Good morning. To work closely with Jason Enns and Monica Mulrennen, who you'll hear from very shortly as they are today's facilitators, as well as Concordia knowledge brokers Prem Suryakumar and David Ward. Hi, Prem. Hi, David.
There. Hi, everyone.
Good morning. So here we are all together to launch Concordia's 17-room exercise. Before handing proceedings over to Jason, just a few notes with regards to this session. You'll note that you are in a Zoom meeting. You've already figured that one out instead of a webinar. And of course, this is purposeful because we want you to benefit fully from this platform so that you might exchange and we can hear from all of you. We'll be taking you through a number of exercises and encourage your active participation. So feel free to jump in with a raised hand at any point. Those of you who are more comfortable in the chat, fear not, your comments won't disappear into the ether. You'll notice that if you set your view to gallery, that we're running this Force Space video box, which you're looking at perhaps now, where we'll be cutting and pasting your chat reflections in so that they're safely kept as a record. I'll remind you that since we are in a meeting format, you can choose your own adventure, your own viewing adventure, that is. You can go to active speaker or gallery, pinning that note screen anytime you wish to do so, etc. We'll take care of setting the view for the recording of the session, which is being streamed to YouTube, and I'll put the link in the chat in just a minute if you want to share it across your channels. Okay, that's it for me in housekeeping. It's now my pleasure to pass the floor to ED Strategic Initiatives in the Office of the Provo, Jason Enns. Welcome in, Jason.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks, Kathy, for that amazing welcome and acknowledgement and reflection that'll kick off today's discussion. I'll just do a quick introduction of myself for those of you whom I don't know. I work on strategic initiatives in the Office of the Provo, and this engagement with the Sustainable Development Goals is one of those initiatives. My interest, I'll just briefly explain my interest and what's compelling for me and about the SDGs, and then hand over to Monica, my co-facilitator, to introduce herself. So this interest for me is connected to my own PhD work back in the day on how universities enact their commitments to civic engagement. And in that work, and in my work since then, I've really felt the absence of a set of clear shared objectives that could be used to guide engagement work and to establish common cause with governments and communities. And I think the SDGs are an interesting candidate for that kind of framework. And on top of this, of course, is the deeply felt sense of urgency as we continue to live outside of planetary boundaries, and with all the implications that has for future generations. So that's part of the motivation for me in engaging in this conversation and in convening this 17 rooms exercise to talk with the community about what we can do in the face of the challenges that we face as a society. So handing over to Monica, and then we'll let you all introduce yourselves after that.
Thanks, Jason, and thanks, Kathy, for getting us off to such a great start. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Monica Monron, Associate Vice President, Research, responsible for research development and outreach. I'm also professor in the Department of Geography, Planning and Environment. And in terms of my background, I've had the great privilege of working for almost 30 years with Torres Strait Islander communities in Northern Australia, and also James Bay Creek communities in Iwichti, working with them on their strategies for land and sea stewardship, which are based on their time-tested institutions of governance, knowledge, and practice. My interest in the SDGs is motivated, I'm sure like many of you, by a deep concern for the state of our world and a real sense of urgency to contribute to efforts to redefine our relationship with it and with one another. I see the SDGs as a list of good intentions. They are starting points for dialogue and about how we might fashion an improved world of social and environmental justice and responsibility. However, you know, just drawing on my own work, you know, I'm very much aware of the need for us to listen to Indigenous people, to understand how the SDGs translate in their cultural terms and their context of community and territorial self-determination. And I see that as really essential to fulfilling our responsibilities as settlers, treaty partners, and allies. So back to you, Jason.
Great, thanks, Monica. So you've had a chance to be introduced to the folks who are helping to organize this conversation. Now I'd just like to ask the participants here today to do a quick introduction. You can just share your name and your connection or your role at Concordia, as well as maybe just a brief sentence or two about what's interesting or compelling for you about the SDGs and or the particular issue that we're discussing here today around poverty. So I'll just start. I don't know if Kathy, if you have a sense that you've given a full introduction of yourself, but I'll just give you a quick minute if you want to jump in and contextualize yourself in relation to Concordia.
Okay, Tanze Kathy Richardson Zagasan. I'm the director of First People Studies here at Concordia. My background is, I guess you could say, in Indigenous / child and youth psychology. I'm also a counselor, and I work in this Montreal area, supporting a lot of people that work at Indigenous social service agencies. So offering them support and leadership training and guidance on how to be good and ethical helpers with Indigenous families. And part of my research has been around violence recovery and prevention, including state violence as well as interpersonal violence. So yeah, I'm happy to be here and happy to meet you all. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kathy. Darai, would you introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, my name is Durai and I'm a PhD student in mechanical engineering and my interest on the SDG evolved when I was asked to be part of the committee from the GSA, and then in addition to that the industry innovation which is part of being a research student, that's one of the SDG which was giving some kind of new things coming up, and for all this the basic thing is the poverty. Once the poverty is kind of taken care, the rest all will fall in line, and that was the intention. I thought I should participate in this thing, so that's the other reason. Thank you, and I'm happy to be part of this 17 Room initiative. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Durai. And yeah, there was clear intentionality about identifying poverty as the first SDG. It has this fundamental place. Maybe Karyuki, we'll ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your interest.
Right. So my name is Karyuki Kerigia. I just completed my PhD at McGill, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Concordia within the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. So my research has focused more on conservation and land governance in East Africa. But before that, I've also done research in other Eastern African countries and West Africa. And I think the one thing that ties my research in terms of interest, that ties together my research in terms of interests is the quest to improve the quality of life within the African context and among indigenous peoples in the world. So that's why I signed up for SDGs to think about institutions and their how they impact these strategies and ways of improving quality of life in the world, looking at their limitations and opportunities that they provide and thinking critically about them.
Very interesting. Thanks for the introduction. Andrew.
I just got uncharacteristically really stressed out that this is live.
Oh, you're muted. You bumped the mute button.
I'm here because it's the only way I could actually work with Monica and Jason, because it's a pandemic. I guess I'm the Dean of Students here. I've been involved in social justice since my first undergraduate degree, and to just put it shortly, quickly, the SDGs to me represent a systemic way of looking at issues, and we never do that at the university. We don't look at our system as a system and try, right? We're siloed, and so this is exciting to me. It kind of encompasses potentially a lot of the work we're trying to do in a way that allows us to maybe do some deep impact change, either within our system or beyond.
Amazing. Thanks, everyone. Just a great assemblage of people here. Monica, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jason, and thanks, everyone. Yeah, we're a small group, but we've really tried to include a diversity of faculty, staff, and students, because we see this as a whole of the organization effort. We've aimed to include a diverse range of people, perspectives, and experiences in who we've invited to participate, though unfortunately, not everyone was able to attend today, and for sure the weather didn't help. But we see the conversation today as really a starting point, with a need for more perspectives and input and discussion of any ideas we think deserve to be pursued. We've also identified some additional opportunities, such as next month's LSRC Conference on Indigenous Expertise and Sustainability, where there will be conversations happening a little bit outside of the 17 rooms. But great to have you all here. Just in terms of the lineup for today, not sure if you can see the agenda. Do I need to do something to get the agenda on there?
We can spotlight the view for everyone if that's helpful.
Great, thanks, Anna. So so just see, we've got, we really have 4 main activities that will take the first couple taking around 15 minutes, and moving on then to, and actually these build on one another. So we're going to look at the benefits and critiques, because there's some uneven assessments of the SDG, and we just want to put those out there. We want to look at the landscape around Concordia in terms of what's happening around SDG 1, and then have a discussion on university relevant targets for SDG 1. And then the fourth exercise is really a brainstorming session around what we can do, where we should focus. That'll be after the break, and we'll have some sharing and discussion feedback on that at that point. So moving on then, so the goal of the 17 rooms exercise is really to convene people with shared interests around each of the SDGs to discuss how we can more effectively contribute to progress around important issues. So today is poverty, but we'll be discussing over the coming weeks education, equity, climate, and so forth. We recognize that Concordia, is really doing quite a lot around some of the SDGs and maybe very little around others. So this means that, the 17 rooms exercise will be quite varied in terms of some of the conversations will be quite advanced, whereas others will be at the beginning, a very early stage in some of those conversations. The specific objectives of today's session is really to foster connections between people with shared interests and orientations around SDG 1. We want to identify some shared goals and objectives that we might focus on and brainstorm ideas for what Concordia might do to advance these goals and objectives. So more broadly then, the 17 rooms exercise will help us determine how we want to engage with the SDGs as a university. And the thinking about how to engage with the SDGs will then be captured in a report called a Voluntary University Review, a VUR, which is a self-assessment using the SDG framework. And we're hoping that this VUR work will feed into a broader impact and engagement strategy for the university. So, yeah. Over to you, Jason, for the first of the exercises.
Thanks, Monica, for the intro and the overview. So where we want to start is really kind of pretty fundamental at a pretty fundamental level, and that is considering the SDG framework as a whole. And we want to take just a few minutes here, maybe 5 to 10, to just do a quick review of the potential benefits of this framework. And some of you have already started to make comments to to signal your own sense of these potential benefits. But also we want to be aware of the critiques, and both to share some of those with you that are common critiques, and to hear some that you may have that you want us to carry with us in the rest of the conversation. So we'll start on the positive side of the ledger here, and we'll just spotlight this slide is focusing on these positive elements of the SDGs. So just very quickly, just identified 4 here. The SDGs provide a kind of common agenda. They facilitate this collaboration around shared goals, and this is between universities, governments, communities, even in the private sector. This is a framework that has been agreed upon that says, here's a definition, the UN definition, of what sustainable development entails, and that facilitates this collaboration. They also connect economic, social, and environmental aspects of sustainability and sustainable development. So these aren't silos, it's not just focused on one or the other, it's integrative and somewhat comprehensive. The third benefit is that it places an emphasis on clear and concrete targets and outcomes. It doesn't just and only articulate aspirations. It says, here's how we know that we've achieved something and made some progress on these goals. And a fourth benefit is this builds this sense of urgency. It establishes 2030 as a crucial deadline, and we see that date hovering around in lots of different discourse around the agenda between now and 2030, and the SDGs help to reinforce that sense of urgency. So I'll just pause here and ask if folks want to elaborate on any of these, add to what we see here and even talk about your own interest in this framework. Andrew, you've already kind of started to do that in your introduction to yourself. I don't know if there's anything else you want to elaborate on, but it'd be good to hear from folks about this side of the ledger before we move on to talking about some of the critiques of the SDG framework. Yeah, Kathy, jump in.
I don't know if it's already embedded here, but I'm wondering about supporting Concordia grassroots movements, bottoms up movements, such as, you know, student groups and different you know, clubs or organizations also being empowered to create projects such as the People's Potato or whatever. So everything isn't top down, but that it's moving in multi directions.
So this is if Concordia has a commitment around engaging SDGs at a kind of high level, it's kind of a leverage point for people from their own perspective and their own organizations or communities to use that as leverage for advancing their work. Is that how you see it? Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Great. Anyone else want to talk about what's on the positive side of the ledger here with respect to the SDGs?
I mean, maybe also the word in the first one, add the word language, because the common agenda, the common language is useful too, as people are trying to work towards common goals. And sometimes that language is not always agreed to. So getting a language that's agreed to and that everyone uses can be really helpful in working towards those goals.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great, Andrew. Thanks. Anything else people want to add? Otherwise, we'll move to the critical perspective on the SDGs. Okay, so we'll move to the second, the other side of the coin, critiques of the SDGs, and if you can spotlight that again, please. The first, I think we all feel, is that the SDGs are so vast and comprehensive, it's hard to know where to start and how to engage exactly. So it's the very nature of the fact that they are comprehensive that can be a hurdle. And as we've noted previously, the SDGs don't adequately take into account the rights, interests, and perspectives of Indigenous peoples. They were an agreed upon set of definitions and goals and targets that the nations represented at the United Nations adopted, but Indigenous peoples don't have formal representation at the UN. So these aren't by, with, and for Indigenous communities in terms of articulating those goals. A third critique is that the SDGs don't go far enough in addressing root problems. They establish these goals and targets, but they don't address sources of inequality and sources of biodiversity degradement, etc. And a fourth criticism is that the SDGs are, in some cases, internally contradictory. And the prime example here is, how do you pursue economic development and growth at the same time as you preserve the environment, right? And these can be contradictory goals. And if you don't reconcile those somehow, then you can be pulling in two directions as opposed to pulling in one direction. So as I did previously, I'll just pause here and see if folks have other things to contribute in terms of the critiques we need to keep in mind, or the limitations of this framework in terms of what it provides for us, or you know, as we're going forward and thinking about how we can engage with this framework, what do we need to keep in mind?
I would put Kathy's comment here in that, you know, these are high-level aspirational goals coming out of a room in New York City, but people on the ground are either doing this work or trying to do this work, and that's the disconnect, right? Is that let's be here, and there are people who have been working on this stuff, even at Concordia, as you know, Jason, for years, right? So it's like marrying that, right? It's recognizing what's been going on and is going on, and finding a way of using these to support that work. And it's not really a criticism, it's just kind of reframing that idea of hierarchy and what's happening on the fringe that is innovative, and not assuming nothing's being done and now we've got these new set of beautiful goals. Let's do it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it can be boiled down to the very fundamental question: what do the SDGs add to, or what kind of leverage do they provide for people already doing the work? What's the value add there? Yeah. Others, I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in. Did I see, Karyuki, did I see that you were about to? No.
I'm thinking about institutions and seeing often that the focus on sustainability is usually on environment, and basically having three aspects that you're focusing on that kind of leave out the aspect of politics. I think that's crucial. And again, talking about institutions, but we talk about peace and justice and strong institutions. We still see in terms of institutions, I see that the political aspect is still left out because we have the economic, the social, and the environmental, and within the business world, for instance, we see that translates to the codification of or adoption of people, planet, profit. But how those things are made to work often enough depend on the existing kind of political arena, and given the diversity or the breadth of different political settings in the world, the fact that we leave out the political aspect, I think, is even for us at Concordia, how are decisions made, basically, decision-making processes. I think that's a key aspect that I feel that in terms of defining sustainability within the SDGs has been left out, and we need to take it into account, both at the bottom level, at all levels, basically, to really make sure that we have, if we have good proposals or projects, initiatives to carry out, we can think about those processes of how decisions are made and the kind of political context you're working in.
Super interesting, and we'll circle back to that as we think about, as we kind of as we build up to and start to think about what do we do and how do we activate this engagement and commitment to the SDGs, and what are the structures we need to have in place, and what are the political dimensions of this. That's super useful, Karyuki. Thank you. Andrew.
That was a really interesting comment, and I think that made me think that, you know, poverty is often so focused on the material aspects of poverty, right, as opposed to social poverty and spiritual poverty. And so I think those are things to think about too in this discussion, right? It's you know, the stuff coming out of Tamarack early in their career was all about ending poverty with policies and stuff that dealt with money the whole time, right? Or groceries or something like that, or access to work and employment, but not spiritual and social poverty, which is just as important. And when I say spiritual, I mean the sense of agency, right? That sense of individuals riding their own bike and not having it pulled behind someone else's bike, you know, the sense of agency and citizenship and ownership of or some sort of role in the decisions that affect us.
This is super great, super rich discussion. I'm gonna pause us here as we can resume this thinking as we're going forward and thinking about what we do as an institution and given the challenge of addressing poverty. Just a quick recap here. You know, we're trying to keep ourselves on this knife edge between understanding the benefits and the potential of this framework, and also working with a knowledge of what the criticisms are and the limitations are of that framework. And what we're going to do now is shift into thinking with that in mind. Okay, let's get a sense of what's on the landscape at Concordia around the poverty issue. And then we'll start thinking about where we might focus and what we might do in response to the challenge of the SDGs issue. So, Monica?
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, so let's have a look at what's already happening at Concordia around SDG 1. We've begun to map this to some degree, but we need to get a fuller picture of that, and maybe you can help with that. So here we have a sample of Concordia activities. It shows, some key things that are happening around this SDG. So we'd really like to build on this. What we're trying to do here is capture things that have some degree of visibility and discoverability, so a website or something that really gives them visibility to our students, internal community, and the public. Like, we don't want to get into too much detail, like, there may be courses that have components, maybe some modules within courses, but we're not really looking at that scale. Maybe courses, or ideally course clusters or program options that address this SDG. The same with research, not so much interested in individual publications, more research projects, research programs or initiatives, trying to really identify those. Thinking about what's missing, what we might add here. So maybe I'll just I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with all of these. So the Concordia Longitudinal Risk Project, that's identified under research. So this is it's a study of 3 generations of intercity children from disadvantaged neighborhoods. And this is work that's been undertaken by Dale Stack and her team in psychology. Under then the education, so curriculum and extracurriculum, that middle column, we have some individual courses there, but I think an important one for us is the SEED internships, which is that great program in Uganda, on hold in recent years because of the pandemic, but it's a really interesting program with a lot of projects, including there's a variety of projects that are run through those internships. There's one in virtual tech education, another in youth entrepreneurship, one in youth advocacy and communication, environmental sustainability, and there's one on video documenting. So, and the last column there under services and operations, I think we're all fairly familiar with the Centraid one, need-based student aid, assistance for student parents, and then the open educational resources, so the OER. That's really identification of teaching, research, various materials that are available in open access and then available for use and reuse. And then the volunteer opportunities. So there's a whole host of opportunities available to students in the Mile End Community Mission, St. Michael's Mission, there's Extended Hands, Oxfam, a whole range of opportunities through, well-established partnerships that Concordia has. So,
Monica, Kathy's has her hand up.
Yeah, Kathy, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to point to the Office of Community Engagement. So in the last 2 terms, I've been working with the team there, Genevieve Sui, and we collaborate in our classes. So they will come in and work with us, myself and the students, to create social action projects. So the students, for one of their major assignments, would be involved in service work in the community in some way. So that's a really important group to add to the list, and anyone could access that opportunity just through reaching out with them. I have some other examples through First People Studies, but I won't take up the time right now to share those. I can type them in the chat. Thank you.
Share in the chat, Kathy, or like send a separate email. We're not trying to capture absolutely everything, but as many things as you want to send our way that says these are opportunities and initiatives and projects that are related to this thematic. We're happy to gather all those. Everything you can send us. Sorry.
Anyone, any others that anyone would identify? Sorry, I'm not seeing people in terms of hands up, so just feel free to.
I had my hand up, but I'll just open my mouth instead. Wow, I'm so good at following rules, like a nice young man, and there we go. It doesn't work. I just to take it sideways. One of the things that I wasn't clear on is whether this is really focused externally to the university. This efforts, right? Like, my first reaction is looking at this and thinking of our own system, the Concordia system, and nothing happening outside of it. So how do we reduce poverty internally, right? But I'm not sure what the focus is. So if it, I see this work as impossible unless we're helping ourselves first, kind of like, and it's not that we don't help others at the same time, but we can't do any of this work if we're not actually trying to do the work internally on ourselves too, as individuals and as an institution. But I see those circles as, going outwards, like the ripples in a stone in a pond, right? So that's just where I'm coming at, just so you know. And then so I think there's a column that you've probably thought of including under services and operations that I would call a fourth column, that is student life, that has a whole bunch of things going on. There's a number of student groups that are working on these in different ways, and systemically. So it might be something like Sustainability Action Fund, but their definition of sustainability is like the SDGs. It's kind of encompassing poverty and underrepresentation and things like that. So there's that whole area of things that are going on too that that are found, I guess, under volunteer opportunities. It just seems reductionist to me, but anyway. SEED is there, which shows the kind of Venn diagramness of this, right? Because SEED is a student group, and yet it's under the education piece, which I think is amazing, right? I think that's honest and true, and I love that you put it there and not in the volunteer opportunities thing.
Paula was supposed to be, or signed up to be here today. Unfortunately, she didn't make it, but it'd be great to have her represented. And yeah, that's, like the categories and what fits in what column, we're trying to like somewhat organize it, but it's fluid. We all recognize that. Anybody else have, sorry, I'm jumping in here, Monica. Anybody else have anything
no, it's good.
To kind of
Yeah, and we are interested in what's outward facing as well as internal. And clearly we have to, if it's not happening internal, it seems to me that we don't have the capacity, we don't have the culture, we don't have it's not going to be very effective in the reach out to the external communities. So it's the old getting your own house in order first, but any other suggestions? I mean, either things that we're missing or perhaps, things that are happening elsewhere that we might be thinking about. Or maybe we can move to that later, but cooperatives, yeah. Some of these link, like I think that when we discuss the food security, some of the food, there's clearly strong links there between this SDG, but it's a very good one. Okay, so in terms of just on the basis of this, thinking about our strengths, are we seeing a pattern emerge? Are we seeing particular strengths in any area? It seems to me that the column on the right is nicely populated. So I think we're doing better. There is my sense that we have these various initiatives that are available under services and operations. Surprising that there's so little seems to be directly focused coming from the research. There are some courses, but I think in terms of our strengths, it's in that service area, the aid, the volunteering. And when you think of that, how can we be more impactful in those areas where we're already doing something? What are our opportunities, building on what is already in place? How might we focus and strengthen what we're doing?
I mean, honestly, I almost think it would, like, I think it's funny that we're talking about poverty, because I had this dream last year that, this is where I have to watch what I say, that Graham would say, Concordia will have no student in poverty by the year X, right? I think that we have to say something concrete that then allows us, the rest of us, to find ourselves in it and move forward, right? So that's an example. And it seems really high level and kind of crazy, but it provides a direction, right? So what are we saying about poverty? And then how do we fit into it? And then how do we break down those column silos so that we don't have researchers going out and doing stuff? We have researchers working with student groups that are already doing stuff, and the student groups are, you know, providing something to the researchers who are providing something to the student groups too, which is the experience of the research thinking. And how does that get course integrated? It's like, how do we do it better as we integrate ourselves better, and then show, and then talk about it big time, right? Whether it's Torres Strait or whether it's Mackay Street, you know, like we show an integrated approach to this work and a true commitment to it that way, and then talk about it nonstop and see if other people pick it up or anything, right? There were some interesting things you put in this document from other universities that were, some of them were very bold, clear statements that were extraordinary, quite honestly, very inspiring, you know. But I think one needs that. No student shall be graduated in poverty in the year 2030. And this is what we do, right? And that goes out to where are they living? What communities are they living into? What do we do that? How do we work with the community-based organizations where they're living? You know, that kind of thing. We can, anyway, where are they coming from up north? Like, oh, okay, so what do we do about that? I mean,
Andrew, you read our mind. You can jump in and be a facilitator too, because the very next thing what you want to talk about is where do we focus and how might we target our efforts, and what's the thing that we can agree on that would say, like, here's where we want to put our emphasis. I don't know, Kathy, if you have something to jump in here to say. You look like you're kind of leaning forward, but if not, we can jump into this next part of the exercise, which is asking that question: what might our target be?
Well, I mean, this is nothing revolutionary except that we don't do it, but we need an integrated approach that includes housing, right? And cooperative housing, mutual aid societies, and giving students bursaries and not expecting them to take loans, like trying to undermine the system that would create debt and hardship financially for students, and bring them together in, you know, self-created communities. I guess that's what I'll share right now. It's different in the Indigenous world because the communities are often already there, bless them, not always completely able to attend to all these needs. But there are these important questions, like, where do you go if you need a meal? Who will feed you? And there's also this thought-provoking question around, who are your people? Who's going to bury you when you die? And so I think the work is weaving people together to create these intentional communities where they don't already exist, so people don't have to be alone. Thanks.
Super great. So I think I'm gonna,
reminds me that, you know, for our graduate students, many of the scholarships they're on put them below the standard poverty line. I think it's 18,000 or 19,000 is recognized now as the poverty line in Canada, and a lot of our students are at or below it. So these are issues that are rarely even recognized by supervisors. They don't always have access to that information, and those conversations don't often happen, which again goes back to Andrew's point about, you know, the silos that we operate in.
I think I'm going to transition us to this question of targets or aspirations. What do we aim for?
Yeah.
And then we're going to take a break and then really kind of launch into the brainstorming and what can we do, and as Karaoke has reminded us, how do we organize ourselves for this work, and who takes decisions, and how do we structure the political dimensions of thinking about what we might do as an institution. So with respect to the targets and indicators, what we're going to do is just quickly look at and approach this question from what has the UN articulated as targets and indicators related to SDG 1. We're going to think through where do we think we have the most to contribute, or that we might organize ourselves around. And then we're going to take a step back and say, okay, if we were starting from scratch, inspired by the UN, but not bound to their framework, what might we articulate as a university specific target or goal that we might set for ourselves as an institution. So just as a quick review of the UN SDG targets in relation to poverty. So this is a representation of the 7 targets that they've articulated. I'm just going to read the headlines. I'm not going to go through each of them in detail, but you can look at them either in your own packet or on screen here. They're a little small and hard to read, but this is replicated in the packet that we sent you. So eradicating extreme poverty, implementing social protection systems, building resilience to environmental, economic, and social disasters, creating pro-poor and gender-sensitive policy frameworks, reducing poverty by at least 50%, which is, in my mind, related to the first target, highly related in any case. The 6th, equal rights to ownership, basic services, technology, and economic resources. And the 7th is to mobilize resources to implement policies to end poverty. So what we're going to do to try to get a sense of what folks here see as the targets with the greatest potential, we're going to do a quick Zoom poll. And we're just going to ask you to identify which, say, 3 of those targets you think is most relevant for us as a university, or that we have the most to contribute to. Based on, you can think about this if you want, based on what we've seen about what's happening around poverty at Concordia, or you can think about it in relation to just your own work. Which of those is most relevant to you if you don't feel like you have the kind of wider perspective, or which are you most interested and invested in? We're just trying to get a sense of where we think there's a kind of concentrated, a potential to concentrate our focus, see what the results are, and talk that through a little bit, and then take the step back and say, like, okay, if we were going to goal set and target set for ourselves as an institution, what might that look like? So if we can quickly put up this poll, we'll just take a couple minutes, just identify, say, which 3 of these 7 you think are most, up to 3. If you only want to focus on 1, that's fine. Which are the most relevant to us as a university? Which do we have the most to contribute to? Answering this question from your own perspective if you feel like you don't have a cross-institutional perspective. I'll just give you a couple minutes to have a look there. And again, you can cross-reference, you can read the targets in a little bit more detail in the guide that we sent. recognizing it's a little hard on screen to read the slide. So I'm not sure who has access. How many are we still registering votes, or do we have the results yet? There we go. Beautiful. Just open this up a little bit more. Fairly wide distribution, but a heavier emphasis on mobilizing resources to implement policy. So a policy focus, and creating pro-poor and gender-sensitive policy frameworks. And really an emphasis on the policy frameworks, with this kind of a second tier around implementing social protection systems and equal rights to ownership, services, technology, and economic resources. Super interesting. It'd be great to hear anybody commenting on their own voting on this poll and your sense of where we have the most to contribute and the most opportunities. If you have any comments on those. On how you responded to this poll? Or difficulties responding to this poll. Maybe that's also another way to approach this. Is it hard to know that exactly how to respond to that? Yeah, Kathy, jump in.
I can add something. So when you understand people that live on the street, for example, there's you'll hear people say there's a lot of benefits to living on the street than moving up one social rung, because there you're always having to go to meetings and engage with policies and social workers and structural barriers and people like trying to control your life and get you to do things. And so I've heard in my work over the years, people would rather just like be free. So in terms of eliminating the most extreme forms of poverty, it's not just about, it's about money, but it's about developing approaches that involve human dignity and continuing to, like Andrew said, agency, continuing to offer maximum choice for people to make decisions about their own lives. It's just that society asks people to jump through a lot of hoops to get a bit of free money. And so a lot of people would completely rather not have to deal with poverty landlords or that kind of environment of extortion and disrespect. So it requires, some big thinking about how we can help to uplift people, but while still respecting their needs for dignity, I think. I'm going to have to go in a minute, but thank you for the work that you're doing here. It's really, really important.
Really appreciate,
so much,
Kathy, that you really appreciate you joining us. And really, if the next part of our discussion here is really thinking about what might we do, what might we orient ourselves around as a goal, as an institution. And if you have thoughts on that, feel free to send them our way. Really appreciate you joining. Anyone else just want to give a quick explanation for where they think there's the most opportunity for us to contribute, or that we have the clearest orientation? There was an emphasis on policy, and I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that. So that's so we'll take away the results from that poll and just want to take a couple minutes here before we have a quick break. Andrew, you've gotten us well launched on this question of if we were just stepping back and saying, what might our goal to be as an institution? You've already articulated one potential candidate there of by 2030 or by some specified date, not having students who, I don't remember exactly what the wording you had was, but it's a great start for this kind of thinking about what might we do and target as an institution. That's specific to our community. But we may have some kind of outward facing corollary to that as well. So interested to hear, Andrew, if you want to elaborate at all on that idea, or at least restate it so we can make sure we capture the phrasing that you use. And would be interested to hear, I don't know if Durai or Kariuki also want to contribute to this thinking about what we as an institution might target or set as a goal for ourselves.
I mean, I think it's interesting to think of, no member of our community will live in poverty by X date, and where they operate. So that allows us to then move into the external too, right? It's not just on our campuses, but where they are. I mean, this is not very articulate, but I'm trying to marry the internal focus with the external reality and responsibility, right?
Mm.
But trying to keep it as close to our people as possible without then limiting it to just them, right?
Mm.
So the communities in which they operate and live, this and that, right? Which can be all over the place. We know we have people from all over the world here. So.
Mm. Yeah, scope is an important question of setting a target, right? Where do you establish some kind of boundary, and what can you take responsibility for as an institution?
Right, absolutely.
Kariuki, I think you were going to jump in there. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. Yeah, actually, first of all, to build on Andrew's point, in terms of linking the university personnel, students, and everyone else with the communities, I'm also thinking in terms of where we do our research, the communities we work with, and how we can think about how to impact those communities in different ways. Quite often we've had, as researchers, maybe when you're starting off, people asking, okay, so how do I benefit from your research? And then you respond that you're only coming here to learn. But I think it's about time we move beyond that, just like, extracting knowledge. And when you talk about even knowledge co-production and so on and so forth, to really think critically about the challenges that those communities face and think about how we could contribute more meaningfully to addressing those challenges. The other thing is, maybe I'm jumping ahead here. I saw in terms of publications, there's only one publication on poverty, which is very minimal compared to other topics. So I was thinking in terms of the university as a place where we produce knowledge that has impact as well on policy, which maybe has influences all the polling pattern that we just had. How to think more critically about how to engage policymakers with the knowledge that's produced within the university, so that we don't become just like these ivory towers where we don't really engage with the rest of society.
A couple of things that I heard there. One is the potential for identifying. So the target setting may be that we identify particular neighborhoods or communities where we focus our effort. Am I interpreting the first part of your comment clearly, in terms of like establishing those collaborative relationships with some communities that we say we want to work most closely with, and using that as a way to kind of orient and focus the work? Yeah, is that, am I capturing that correctly? And then potentially setting goals or having some aspirations around research publications in relation to this work. And maybe if you could reiterate the policy aspects of that in your mind, like maybe with the intention to have a policy dimension to that research orientation. Is that what you're suggesting?
Right, yeah, engaging policymakers with the knowledge that's produced, and also to think about some of the topics that are neglected. Like if we have only one publication on poverty, the next slide that we saw here, agenda for today, how can we make sure that some of the topics that we think are important are also focused on, so that we can generate knowledge that can actually add to, moving towards addressing these challenges that have been aligned as important challenges that we need to address to achieve these development goals.
Yeah, that's great.
I don't know. I realize I'm wading into an area of the university I know nothing about, apart from being the recipient of it sometimes. But I feel like on the research side, there could be a whole set of questions one asks before one engages in research. And I mean, I don't doubt that Monica has all of these in her back pocket and they just come out naturally. But, I mean, it doesn't seem like it's a poverty issue. But there's this building at Loyola that's looking at walls for environmental purposes that was just put up on the city farm school, basically. So that shows the poverty of student groups are at the bottom, and someone's not making decisions about this. Someone's not thinking of this when they're thinking of research, right? So I don't know how we just, I mean, that's a place to do some policy work, is we won't do any research until there's a poverty scan of what we're doing, right? I don't know. And it seems like building walls that might be sustainable for building houses doesn't have anything to do with poverty, except there's a student group that's living on this space and has been there forever, and no one even thought about it, and no one really cared until we caused a ruckus, right? So internally, there seems to, why don't we have like, okay, it's not just like how great is this going to look on our research publications, but like what is the sort of approaching it the way the Office of Community Engagement approaches their work, right? They kind of go in with a Hippocratic oath, is like, do no harm first, and then we'll see what we can do. I think that would be an interesting place to look at, right? And I'm not saying there's an ethics shield that goes into research. I know that. And then I've seen questionnaires going out of this university to our students that shocked me, that it somehow made it through an ethics screen. And, so I think there's another set of questions that aren't just ethics screens. It's more of a deep commitment. We will do no research that doesn't X, Y, and Z, or you can frame it positively, SEED does this really well. SEED does this really well, which you've highlighted. They don't do research, but they don't do any work in Uganda, which is not coming out of a need of the community, right?
I think we're seeing some greater attention to that sort of consideration, particularly around how human research is conducted. But I think you're right, Andrew, just the scale of that issue, like how things happen on the ground, we're not paying enough attention to. There's some really positive things happening around the attention being given now to research impact. Like in the past, there was this sense of, you do your research and then it gets taken up in whatever way, but a lot more attention to seeing that through, following it, understanding how it's being experienced by others. Some of the major competitions in the last couple of years have put a lot more attention to that impact. So I think we're at a moment where there's a rethink and a lot more attention to doing the kind of work that is really impactful. So if we can ride that momentum and shape some of the conversations that are happening around there's a real opportunity, I think, for us in the research area to do work that has much more tangible benefits for the communities and for the experience of it by many groups, particularly underrepresented groups.
That's so encouraging. I mean, you think maybe we make a commitment to doing no research with communities that isn't 10 to 15 years. And when we come in, we don't just bring in research, we bring in Office of Community Engagement, we bring in some student groups that might, so we're coming in with so many resources to listen, and our commitment is 10 years, right? We know nothing can change before that. And so the idea that I have a research grant for X 5 years or something, and then I'm out, right? And like, I think maybe there's something there, is that, and we come in with like, who else can we bring into this community and what might they need, right? So what do you need? What do we have at this university? Well, I don't know. We have all sorts of things at this university. We're coming in with this research project, and we're coming in with this other set of supports and resources and eyes and ears and hearts.
Yeah, super rich. I'm just going to quickly just do a check-in with Durai. Is there anything you want to add to the conversation at this point about targets and how we might focus our work at the institution, and then we'll take a quick break. So.
Like I mentioned in the very beginning, like if we are looking at the industry innovation and which is one of the 17 rooms, the basic bottom line is like, if we try to do away with the poverty and taking care of this at the very beginning, as Andrew and others were mentioning, if that is taken care, and this innovation in connecting with the community and all these things will be taken care. And I think this is one of the key things which we need to look into it. And also the things what Andrew was mentioning, like some of the sustainability activities which is being done by the student groups like CSU and other things. I think that as part of the research, if we can collaborate and do, I think that those things will be helpful. And also I think some of the activities by even the multi-faith also, in a way, trying to I'm not sure, maybe Andrew may be correct, may correct me if I'm wrong. I think that in a way they are also helping in poverty and at some point of time. And also the sustainability, not the student food fund or something, and that was really helpful, even during the pandemic, where a lot of students. So those are the things I think we have to consider as part of a separate column what Andrew was mentioning by the student life, so that will add value to our work, I guess, as part of this room initiative, I think. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, thanks. That's great. So let's all take a quick, maybe 5 minutes bio break, get a drink, stretch our limbs a little bit, and then we'll come back and do some brainstorming and discussion about what we come up with in terms, and we've already kind of like started to generate these ideas. How might we organize and orient ourselves as an institution? Do a little bit more brainstorming, draw on some of the examples that we saw in the participant guide, and then figure out, have a discussion about kind of where next and where we'll go from here. So 5-minute break. We'll see you all in a few.
We should get started because time is ticking away on us. Yeah, so just picking up where we left off. So we've identified some of the benefits and limitations. We've looked at various activities at Concordia. We've discussed the targets. So now we really want to move into some brainstorming around what we could do that would allow us to be more impactful. And we want to focus on two scales for this. So to consider two things. So immediate ideas. So these are ideas that are big enough to matter and small enough to get done. And then longer term ideas. So thinking around a time frame of something like 5 years. So a more aspirational vision for Concordia, what we might do over 5 years, as opposed to more immediately. We also need to keep in mind our commitments to decolonization and indigenization, addressing anti-Black racism, pursuing EDI. So just ensuring that they're there in the wings and looking for opportunities to advance those commitments. But so really what we're going to do is to think about these two timeframes, and then to focus on building on our current work. We've identified some of the things we're already doing. You can build on those, or there may be things that we can think about new things, proposing new efforts. And it could be in any of those areas: research, education, services, and operations. And there's probably some value to thinking about we should be doing something in all of those areas, maybe. Ideas can be internal or external facing, so different scales of operation. Obviously looking after the internal Concordia community, but there's a lot that we're doing that extends well beyond that through internship opportunities and through research. So our aim really is to identify things that promise to significantly advance Concordia's impact around SDG 1.
Go.
So we're not going to break into groups because we're a small enough group to all stay together. And what you could do, in terms of getting started, we've got some ideas there on the slide. If you don't know where to start, you could talk about how you might amplify your own efforts, or how you might link to other things being done at Concordia. And we have those examples that were shared in the package of initiatives that are underway in other universities, so they could be a source of inspiration for us as well. But So maybe if we start off thinking about maybe the longer term, the more aspirational, and then maybe we can start to identify as well some of the more immediate things that we could get done.
Maybe somewhere to start, Andrew, is you talking about, you mentioned that you referenced the examples. Was there one of those that in particular kind of stood out to you as most interesting? And that we might think of as models?
The U of A one was quite intense. Like, it had a lot of stuff going on in it. So I didn't go through it with a fine-tooth comb.
Yeah.
One thing I was thinking, though, I think it would be interesting for us to figure out how we have a lens that is not just, again, and I'm going to say this again, and it's a definition I read somewhere, it's not SDGs definition, but not just focus on material poverty, because that is then just like further stigmatizing certain groups of people in certain parts of the world, right? Elon Musk, I'm sure, has a certain amount of spiritual poverty going on. So find ways of talking about poverty which involve everybody and don't limit some people, right? So that we're kind of reframing the conversation and not just like, oh my gosh, that poor community, let's go in and help it, right? But like, what are we looking at when and who is spiritually poor? And that would then take me to looking at how do we start measuring our own community? And like, what is the situation of, someone mentioned, maybe it was you, Monica, food insecurity. I'm struggling with this one because we don't even know, we have this CEF that is now the Student Emergency Food Fund that's run out of the Dean of Students office now. And we don't even know what the level of food insecurity is and the level of poverty of our own community, staff, faculty, and students, right? So figuring out some way of measuring that and then expanding again into some communities in which our people find themselves living, working, researching, and focus on those. And you could take a tranche, like one of them is Concordia campus. The next one is the Peter McGill area. Just take one, and then one would be, Quebec, and one would be the world, and try and take pilot projects that try and put into place the aspiration of looking at the full sense of poverty, because we might find ourselves working in a developing country on material poverty and find there's such a wealth of spiritual wealth there, that there's actually something we can learn and translate into Westmount, right? Like, you know, the social connections and things like that. So I think it'd be really inspiring and more honest to reframe the work and look for the assets of where we are and try and bring those across those kind of definitions of poverty, the social, material, and spiritual. But focus on certain communities too. Like, let's go deep dive into communities where we already are.
Super interesting. Stephanie, on the question, the specific question about what we know about our students, I'm wondering if you could talk about the limitations of what we ask and what we know, in particular with respect, I mean, your portfolio is financial aid and awards, so that is a, you know, you have a particular boundary on what you're responsible for. But I'm just curious to help us kind of understand that question, or the proposition that Andrew made about first understanding the situation in our community, starting from your perspective. What do we know? What do we not know? And what are the limitations on what we can ascertain?
Yeah, and that is a really big question. And even within the sphere of the students that like we work with right now at Concordia, you know, coming through financial aid and awards in some way, there's roughly about 9,000, okay, of our community members. So within that scope, you've got, you know, everyone has this common goal of wanting to access higher education for the benefit of their future selves. But within that sphere, you've got like a range of abilities to get out of or perceive the way to get out of your situation. And so the poverty, for it not to become embedded, needs to have a path where, you know, you're showing someone the way forward so that they can learn and they have the opportunity, and then they can take what they've learned and go. Like, it's about this independence, gaining independence, and then having the skills. And some people have a lot more of that. It's a resilience issue. And then others have a really hard time where resilience is a real problem. So I guess when I'm thinking about, if I wanted to stop poverty, I can throw money at people till the cows come home, and I will stop some of it, but I will patch it. And if I never get to that resilience component, where the person in question, wherever they're from, can't actually know, okay, I've had a fail and I come back and I can get some support again. And then how do I recharge? How do I get going again? And of course, some failure is fine. There does come a point where you may have to recognize this is not the right path for you. Like, I guess that's a student aid sidebar, where a student who's just, you know, not making academic progress is another story. But so I guess there's definitely money that's required, but then there's this concept of what's the support? How does it really get customized so that you don't own a student's problem? Because you can't, it's theirs. So they've got dealt a cruddy hand, and that's like, no one's happy about this, but unfortunate. And I guess I'll just state, I've been dealt some cruddy hands. So I, you know, like, having lived some of these things, it's like, okay, that was really crap. But what do you do with that? And how do you train someone to say, okay, you know what? Yeah, that stinks, but we're going to help you with the money part. And then it's the mindset part, so that it's not just, it doesn't just feed itself. It evolves. Like, you know, you move on. I don't know, is that making any sense? Or is that just Stephanie like rambling without, I don't know, impact?
It's a good place to start. And the question is, what are those other dimensions, and how do we potentially organize ourselves to be better at that work of addressing some important financial constraints that students face, and then also enabling a kind of growth and thriving and et cetera. That like what are ways that we might do that as an institution? That's an interesting question. Yeah.
Like, how do you make a comfortable space where people who may be ashamed of their financial situation or maybe embarrassed and don't even want to speak up, you know, to say how hard it is. And to Andrew's point, maybe lacking that sort of the spiritual, like if they're in spiritual poverty, because I'll define that as giving up and trying to tell people, no, it's not hopeless. Like, don't give up, you know, like you can overcome this is possible. And I guess in a university context, it's sort of seeing that student through their studies and then into that like first job. And if you can get a student into the first job, you know, at least then they're into society, they're contributing in some way, and they're earning back themselves. I don't know, it's one path that I thought of. I mean, you've got like windmill, sort of the micro lending initiatives is another one, like as a potential I'll say copycat program. I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just, you know, does Concordia want to have a program where, you know, folks pay into it, it lends money, and then people pay it back when they can? And there's sort of, again, how do you get people launching, you know, into society and then going with that? So to me, I guess that the key things would be, it's a starting process where at least we identify that, okay, so-and-so, whoever they are, yep, there's an issue. Is money the only problem? If it is, well, okay, let's put some there. And then beyond that, what's the support that kind of wraps the student in a safe bubble? Maybe home isn't safe, maybe, you know, I don't know what the bubble looks like, but just a safe pathway. And in a place of honesty where you can just say without repercussion, like, oh my God, you know, and no one's like judgy about it. It's just, okay, you know, I don't know who that is. And then you graduate and you're connected somewhere and off you go. And I don't know. It's like, that's what I'm saying. When I first thought about this group, I'm like, I'm almost embarrassed to attend because I'm not sure anything I say is going to be making any sense. But
we're all stumbling forward together, and
yeah,
clearly, I mean, sorry again, Monica, I just keep jumping in.
No, that's it. I mean,
But clearly, based on I mean, yes, there are things that we're doing. It's not as though there's nothing happening that addresses this dimension of people's lives around poverty. Clearly, we're doing things. But on the other hand, we don't have a North Star. We don't have a kind of like, here's what we're doing as an institution around this issue. So we're all in this position together of trying to like figure out how would we get started with this and what might our North Star be. So don't feel badly about not having a crystallized sense of this yet. And I don't know that anybody really does.
Just to push this a little further, I mean, maybe playing devil's advocate here, I mean, could it be seen that our privilege allows us to think about what poverty means in different terms? There's been a lot of discussion about the 190, you know, 190 a day as the rate for poverty. And for us to move away from that very fundamental issue of poverty and hunger and the materiality of that is there not a need for Concordia to, yes, address these very real issues for us, but also have this responsibility at the global level, given the extent of a dire, very raw definition of poverty, which is 190. And I'm just wondering if this needs to be a two-pronged, yes, we take care of our own, but we have this responsibility to do more. at this other level.
I mean, absolutely. I don't think their intention, but you know, I mean, absolutely. We have people already doing work all over the world, I think, right? It's just to focus it in a way that is coherent with everything we're doing, right? So there is a responsibility globally for sure, but we have homeless people right outside our front door, right? And for the life of me, I don't know why we don't have a collective impact project right around here. You know, our security people are doing this amazing work with homeless people now. We have a student group doing the 5 days for the homeless, which is kind of fun, right? But we don't do anything else. Like, you know, they're right on our front door. That's poverty. But maybe there's a wealth there too, right? Maybe there's some assets there that we need to study too. I don't think it's one or the other. I just think the commitment is to a systemic approach to what we're doing that brings in as many parts of our community as possible and shows that they are interrelated, right? That those relationships that Catherine talked about in the territorial acknowledgement, right? Those like we're in relation all the time to each other, whether I'm in Montreal or someone's in Kigali, and you know, and whether it's me and the tree and the squirrel, like we're in relationship, whether we like it or not. And so let's look at that and have that as part of the work we do, right? We could someone mentioned housing. We could just decide we want to focus on housing. We want to focus on housing for our students. We want to focus on housing in Montreal. We want to focus on housing in the countries we're in up north, like, but just have some sort of focus that makes it where we're able to go deep. You know, a big topic goes deep, and then we can really see what we've learned.
I would just chime in as well, because I definitely see that there's ways, you know, or pathways for sort of more world impacts, especially through the research component. But in thinking about smaller and maybe more local, one of the things that we see in the financial aid office, which is always very troublesome, is the children of students in poverty. And I can't help but think a little bit about the struggle of those families. And if you can intervene, I guess, early and help a child in some way and break that cycle early on, wouldn't that be fantastic? Just a thought. Like, you know, when you see a family come and there's a little kid there and they have nothing, you know, not even 2 hands to do a job, and they're stuck. And maybe if we could do something about that, like I don't know, that's one that, like in our sort of private philanthropy, we kind of focus a little bit on groups that are working in that area, because you got to give kids like a chance, right? Level that playing ground or playing field, and the earlier you can do it and kind of show them, well, wait a minute, you know, I don't know if we have anybody researching things about children in poverty. I don't know if we have anything in CUSP which demonstrates, you know, any of that stuff. But that's another thing we see in our world, which strikes a nerve, I guess, when I think about poverty.
Stephanie, actually, we have that longitudinal study, which is really amazing. 3 generations of families that have been tracked. So since the mid-70s, inner city, and various indicators that are being surveyed at a regular interval. So that's really giving, you know, this is the work.
Who is doing that? This is the first time hearing about
I'd never
this.
heard of this either. And I
Yeah.
wonder, what are we doing with this? Like like, why, we have a Centraide initiative every year where we're like, are these people in, like, what are we doing? Just looking at them? Like, this sounds amazing.
I don't
But
know.
I'm
I'm
like-
surprised it wasn't reflected in more publications, because I think
Oh, right.
identified it was just the one.
But what are we learning there that is important for all of us to know? Like, if you're in there that long, you must have learned something, for God's sakes.
Yeah. It's being led, I don't know, I think Monica, you mentioned it earlier, it's being led by Dale Stack in psychology, but Lisa Serban has also been, I don't know exactly what the nature of the relationship is, but she's been part of components of that long-term study, I think, as well. Yeah, but I agree that there may be some potential there to tap that research and activate it, and use it as a guide for things that we want to do institutionally. And I'm curious, karaoke. The one comment Monica had made about, is there an opportunity to us be thinking on an advocacy and policy level about definitions of poverty and relative levels and so on? I'm just wanting to see if there's anything you want to contribute here in terms of ideas in the policy research and policy space, and if there's something that you want to potentially put forward as an idea for what a university-based initiative in this in relation to poverty might be.
Right. Some of the ideas that have been shared have actually kind of, some people have taken my words away. At the same time, inspired others. So, as I said, my work has really focused on the question of improving the quality of life, which is really thinking about this question of poverty. And for example, the question that Stefan was raising about how do you help kids, and sometimes being in different geographies, having had the privilege to be in different geographies, to see different livelihoods, cultural differences, how we define poverty, how we think. For instance, I've been involved in some research here, and one of my culture shocks was the extent to which money was so central to everything that we're talking about, people's well-being. And even after having been around here for such a long time, I realized that maybe my kind of relationship with money was different from the way that we are trying to conceptualize it in that research program. And so I started to think about how is this idea of monetarizing or giving a monetary value to $1 or $2 a day as a measurement of poverty? How does it translate to different settings in the world? Because what determines the quality of life in different parts of the world is not so much, it depends on different aspects, whether it's really different relations, as Andrew was mentioning, and how then within I'm thinking in terms of the context of Concordia, which has an international student body, maybe to enrich these ideas and for us to incorporate more voices would be to have some kind of I don't like the word competition, but we see competition of ideas, of thinking about I've seen, for instance, where I studied at Utrecht University, they have this program called the Global Challenges Program, and I'm thinking whether we can have a program or maybe an arrangement where students forward the ideas which they feel could help to solve aspects of poverty, and that way consider those ideas and maybe support some of those ideas to be executed within the places that they would maybe, whether it's Kigali, as Andrew was saying, or whether it's somewhere else. And in terms of the question, again, Stefan was asking, there's recent work by economists, I think Esther Duflo, who won the Nobel Prize, about sometimes in places where you have schools and then you introduce meal programs, kids tend to go to school much more. School attendance is improved tremendously just because you have the possibility of getting food from there. And because sometimes when you don't have food, you can't even go to school. And so you can have free education, but when people can't even afford food, are they going to go to school or go to look for ways of getting food just to survive? So it's kind of those hierarchy of needs to some extent, just to speak about like some of the differences and the complexities of thinking about poverty in a general term. It gives us possibilities and there's all like challenges, and maybe focusing on this, trying to harness the blessing of the student diversity, to think about this by them forwarding the ideas, sharing the ideas, and having maybe a committee that thinks through those ideas and sees which ones could be funded to be implemented, and for those ideas later to be disseminated within the community. And just to finish at this point, we had some discussion at McGill with some friends of mine about how we have these different disciplines, something we talk about now in interdisciplinary arrangements or approaches. And it was that sometimes we have people in social sciences, for instance, I'm in anthropology, and then someone is going to be in finance, another one in engineering. And after we are done with school, we go into this world doing different roles, playing different roles, assuming different roles. But then we contribute maybe to we maybe sometimes exacerbate the situation through our very work. Maybe we're in the World Bank and making decisions there because of financial background. But then we actually are, kind of thumbprinting ideas that are actually going to make life for some people more difficult just because we don't have that kind of social cultural awareness. So how can we make this kind of a basic understanding that whether you do engineering, architecture, or whatever, you become kind of a global citizen who understands life from a very basic level. So those are some of the ideas that was maybe like within our university, I think are attainable.
Super interesting. I'm just wondering, you said the University of Utrecht, you mentioned them in particular with this global challenges program. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I would just type it on the chat here.
Do they run this kind of, does it integrate into curriculum?
I don't.
Separate thing from what you were talking about at the end about, yeah.
Right. I don't think they've integrated it into a curriculum, but I know the professors are kind of head of that program, and I think they've hired some postdocs and PhDs, but I don't know to what extent it's part of kind of a standalone. I think it's within a department and becomes an initiative that kind of supports students at different levels.
Durai, do I see that you want to jump in, or I don't know if that was a finger up, like you wanted to say something, or maybe I misunderstood.
No, not. I just moving my hands. Nothing.
Okay.
Sorry.
I wanted to raise too. There's an interesting initiative at Nipissing where they made a commitment to. So I think it might refer to just its top students, but if after 6 months of graduating they haven't found a position, Nipissing has a commitment to provide additional training. So it's like this commitment to ensuring they make it, to launch them. And it's not this sense of once you graduate, that's it. But there's that kind of relationality to it that we have your back, if you're not making it, we're still here for you. So I think it's a really interesting, I'm not sure the details of it, was Mike Gagne when he was president of Nipissing that was launched. But those kind of ideas speak to me as our role as an educational institute. What can we do that, like, we don't have deep pockets, like we're not, a tech company or something that can. So I'm just thinking about what can Concordia do that aligns with our overall mission? To speak to kind of Stephanie's point around resilience, like how can our education, the education we provide, the learning opportunities, the research environment, how can that support resilience?
I mean, that's huge, right? And it's hard because we're getting people in late. But I mean, one thing we could say is that no one that comes to Concordia will leave before they graduate because they can't pay their rent, they can't eat. I mean, we could do stuff like that so that we're going to give you everything we can at this moment in time. You won't have to take a job that's more than 20 hours a week, right? That's pretty much the limit they found of what's sustainable as a student and a worker that actually feeds you and doesn't detract from one to the other. Like we could make commitments like that, right? I know that there's colleges in the States that they've said that. They've said, no one coming from a less affluent neighborhood, they're going to make sure anyone coming from a less affluent neighborhood who wants is going to study full time, and we'll cover any like we'll make it, because we know that people that get out faster get into the workforce and do better, right? So we're not going to put you through the pain of having to work if you don't want to, and the struggle of paying your rent. We've got your back here. So there's stuff like that we can do.
Although it's a bit like, those of us who are parents know how that works.
Yeah.
Well, you make it too. Well, there's that sweet spot between,
yeah,
the support and the. We
could say, Monica, that if you're a student parent, you're full time with 2 or 3 courses, right? And not, which parents can't get the Opus deal because they're not full time if they don't, but they have kids. Like our internal policies are not consistent with our aspirations and how we talk, right, of our own people. We recruit students internationally, and when they come to us with funding challenges, we say, well, you told the government you had that much money when you came in, so too bad, so sad. Well, it's like, well, we could say that, or we could recognize that what's going on here, right? What's our commitment to not just saying, well, you had to prove that you had that money when you came in, so what do you
It's a super interesting conversation. I'm noting that we're about 8 or 9 minutes to the hour, so I think it might be time to kind of do our wrap up of this initial conversation, talk about what's potentially next, and thank you all for your participation. Super interesting first conversation and seeding ideas and seeding further thinking. There's kind of 2 parts of what's next, and that's what's next on our side and what's potentially next on your side. So for us who are organizing this exercise, we're having these conversations across the 17 SDGs. So this is one of 17 conversations. You're welcome to join future conversations. There's room in many of them still, if you'd like to join again. We'll be aggregating and filtering and doing some work of doing further consulting and prioritizing the kinds of opportunities we've seen across each of these 17 SDGs. And it's really going to culminate in this report that we're issuing on call to voluntary review that does a self-assessment through the SDG lens. What are we doing? Where can we do better? Where are we doing well? What are our opportunities, and what are the strategies we're going to undertake? So there's a kind of a filtering and a review process that will happen, and then some kind of institutional decision about our capacity to invest and seek outside resources to support some of the things we might want to undertake. So that's kind of like where next from here from our side. From your side, in particular, in relation to this conversation around SDG 1, if we're looking to you to see if there's interest in continuing the conversation somehow, and if there is, let us know, and we'll figure out how to advance it, how to support it, how to sustain it, how to, who else to bring into the conversation to figure out what we can do. This is a first conversation. So let us know. I mean, first thing on your side is just be in communication with us. Do you want to pursue this? Who else do you think needs to be involved, and what could you see as some next steps that we might take? There are some existing avenues for people to pursue projects and ideas. It's maybe not super relevant to all the folks in this group, but there are mechanisms in place for people to pursue projects and initiatives related to the SDGs if they want. But really the invitation here is to be in communication with that. That's the primary thing. We want to know, sometimes a first conversation is as far as it goes, and that's okay. Sometimes it's generative and it creates momentum for something institutionally to happen. And so we just need to know from you where your interest level is, and if you want to pursue something, and how committed you are to really wanting to advance this conversation. And then the last thing I'll say is we will, just after we log off here, you'll be sent a quick survey for you to give some feedback on the exercise, the process we use, the facilitation, just because we're at the beginning of 17 and we're open to feedback on whether this was a helpfully facilitated and organized conversation. And we'd appreciate your input and comments on how we're doing and how can we improve this process. So I think with that, we'll just say thanks to everyone here, Andrew, Stephanie, Kariuki, Durai. Really appreciate your time, your investment in this conversation, and your care and concern about the issues here. I don't know if Monica, if you have any last comments to make.
No, I mean, I really would encourage you to join us in other SDG sessions. You know, like a lot of what we've talked about here is very relevant to SDG 4, the inclusive, equitable, quality education. So I think the more folding in of these conversations that we do, we certainly don't want to end up with, 17 kind of individual files. I mean, I don't think that that's very likely to happen, but I think to fold and to be able to advance and build on these conversations within the 17 rooms exercise makes a lot of sense. So encouragement to join us again a few Fridays from now.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you, Jason. I'm making sure you can hear me. Yes.
Yes.
Awesome, great. And yeah, those conversations are happening every Friday, either at this time, 10 to 12, which we appreciate, by the way, your commitment and energy and devout kind of presence here, or sometimes they're in the afternoon 2 to 4. So please just get in touch and we'll provide you with all the details. We are running them via Fourspace. We hope to eventually run them more of a hybrid model inside the space and be able to welcome you back in here so that you could be around the table together. But I just wanted to give a very warm thanks to Jason and Monica for leading us through this and all the incredible work that you did behind the scenes to make this conversation happen. Of course, Prem and David as well for everything that you've contributed behind the scenes up to this moment, and all of the participants. We really appreciate you making the time. This is very worthwhile for all of us, and yeah, thank you for being here. Doug, I think we have an exit survey as we close up for folks to fill out, so we will do so. Excellent. So we're going to go ahead and close the Zoom, and I guess you'll have a little 2-second survey to fill out. If you could help us out, that would be great. Thanks, everybody. On that note, we'll say goodbye and wish you a great weekend.
Is the survey popping up, or do I say goodbye?